Hi, everyone. Welcome to week 9 of COM 100. Dr. Erin Walton here, leading you through another fascinating week of communication. We have Miss Rena Michelle, as I have learned, in the classroom with us today. So she will be able to unmute and add questions to the chat, which of course I'm happy to share with the rest of you as they come in. So on the agenda for tonight, if my slides will advance, we'll see. So quick review of week 8 as always. Let's talk quickly about our grades. So in this class, I'm seeing a lot of good progress, a handful of you actually really coming from behind and catching up on some of your late work. So that's exciting for me to see. I decided, I think it was last week, to send out, instead of my weekly reminder that, hey, you know, you're missing something, or how can I help you catch up? I decided to reach out to everyone who was really killing it last week and provide a little positive reinforcement for you folks. Now, those of you that are still a little bit behind, that doesn't mean you're no longer behind. You just didn't hear from me last week, but you'll probably hear from me this week per usual. Remember, we want to get you all caught up. We want to get you to a passing grade before we get much further. We are in week 9. We've got next week and then the review for the final exam. So our time is shrinking. It really helps me if you folks are kind of on top of what you're behind on, what you need to do. I'm more than happy to open things and apply extensions, as I've mentioned. And I will keep reaching out for the things that are right in front of me, the things you're missing. But if there's anything in your grade book that doesn't quite look correct, or that you think you should have a score for, I would appreciate that you double check that as well, even if you're in good standing in the class. You never know when technology is gonna do its own thing and change all our grades for no reason. So an extra set of eyes on your grades would be helpful for me. That way, when it's time to wrap up the class, we are ready, steady, go. Nothing new really by way of announcements, mostly business as usual. Let me think, anything good? I hope everybody took the day off on Memorial Day and spent it with family. I know that I did my very best to stay out of my emails and such and stay offline. So in as much as Doc relaxes, I got a day off, so that was good. I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. Let's see, anything else for class? I don't think so. So we will do, of course, our quick review of chapter 10 from last week, verbal and visual support and presentations. And then we will jump into chapter 11, where we talk about our actual delivery, the various types that exist, some best practices, some guidelines, how to manage your audience. They can be a little tricky. And then my old favorite, communication apprehension, also known as stage fright. So let me turn off my camera and we will hop right in. All right, my friends. Chapter 10, verbal and visual support and presentation. Just as a recap of our main points, remember, there are reasons we use visual and verbal support in our presentations. Those 3 purposes: make it more interesting, clarify ideas, offer proof. Remember that verbal support is citing of actual sources, things like definitions, examples, stories, statistics, all that good stuff. And citing good sources can enhance your credibility. You also want to make sure that the sources you include are credible on their own. You just get to look extra awesome because you've made good choices by citing credible sources. So it's sort of a two-way street. Now, besides verbal support, we also have visual support, and we lump those all into a category called visual aids. These are obviously more visual. You're highlighting important information, how things look, how they work. These types of things include objects, models, photographs, diagrams, lists, charts, graphs, all that fun stuff, okay? And there's a variety of methods and mediums. Remember, like dry erase boards, computer presentations, handouts, all that fun stuff. The most common, of course, is presentation software like Prezi or PowerPoint, and there are some pros and cons. They absolutely can help you with creating a professional looking display. They can help you simplify and clarify. But when you're using presentation software, you need to mind the design. So understand the standards. Keeping your fonts nice and big, the rule of 7, things like that. And then, of course, always know the tool that you're working with, practice with it, prepare. Don't let the tool take over your speech because you're not prepared with it and it becomes a distraction. That's chapter 10. We talked about all of that last week. If anything sounds unfamiliar, you're more than welcome to go back and review the live session or send me an email. Come on, slides. All right. Excuse me, I've got a bug in my throat. Let me cough. Oh, mercy. All right, here we go. Chapter 11. So the purpose of this week's session is mostly to talk about our actual content delivery. So we're going to talk about the different formats there are. And we're going to talk about, you know, which type goes with which type of presentation. And there is a difference. We want to talk about extemporaneous and impromptu presentations. We're going to talk about, you know, how to handle a Q&A. And then, of course, how to deal with your stage fright, because everybody experiences it. Those are the goals of this chapter. So let's start right up top with types of delivery. So we're going to talk about presentation styles, okay? The first one is monologues. This is anything that's kind of delivered, and I've got Stan Lee up here with the microphone, sort of similar to what I'm thinking will help you visualize a monologue. We're not going to have an interruption here. That's one of the things. Monologues are mostly delivered without any sort of audience involvement, right? So we see those in very large settings, usually formal occasions. I like to imagine monologues as, of course, things actors give, right? If an actor's up on screen delivering a speech in a movie, the audience is not involved. Award winners, Oscars, things like that, when you go up and accept your award, sometimes you'll give a tiny little monologue. Either way, it's pretty one-sided. It's mostly about who's speaking. You also have guided discussions, a little more interactive, okay? So in this presentation, we sort of have kind of an idea of what we're going to be talking about. So maybe Stan Lee is talking about the new upcoming Marvel movies that he's going to be adapting. And the audience is absolutely welcome to have questions, to ask or to provide comments and feedback. And this is very conversational, right? But you have to be careful with guided discussions. You have to have some audience management skills in order to make these successful. I like to think of this as more classroom style conversation, because really, when we're in person, I know online is a whole different story, but when we're in person, this is a lot of the way I teach. I say, hey, we're going to talk about types of delivery today. I might ask you to read the chapter ahead of time and then come with your questions, and I'll give my lecture, and you'll be already pretty prepared with the material. So we can have really good conversations about it. I think about, like, if for my nerds out there, Comic-Con panels where they have all the actors sitting up at the front and you can ask them questions and all that fun stuff. That's more guided discussion, okay? All right, interactive presentations. Now, these obviously involve the audience a lot. Of course, you still have the speaker up front who is in charge and running the show, but this is more conversational. This one's a little bit harder to pull off, in my opinion. because you really need somebody like an MC. So I don't know if anybody's been to any sort of event where there's an MC. Sometimes you'll have one person. MC stands for Master of Ceremonies, and they're going to be pretty much guiding the audience through various points, through various maybe presentations or acts, and they have to really roll with the punches. So for example, if Stan Lee was leading an interactive presentation here, he might talk to the audience a little bit, and he might say something like, well, what do you guys want to hear about? Would you rather talk about the new Black Widow movie, or would you rather talk about Thor: Love and Thunder, right? Now, whichever way the audience goes, he can roll with it. Stan Lee can talk about either topic at length in a really meaningful way. But again, that takes a really talented MC to be able to do that. Some people can feel a little uncomfortable because it's not as controlled. You don't have your questions up front. People might want you to talk about something you're not ready to talk about or you don't know a ton about. So interactive presentations, that's like the height of delivery styles for me. Now, there are styles of delivery, and then there are types of delivery, and there are distinctions. Okay, so one way to think about it is the different modes, the way in which the options you have essentially for delivering your presentation. And your textbook talks about 4 different modes, and they all have pros and cons. Again, they all have their place. So the first one is a manuscript, which is where you have a full speech written out word for word on a piece of paper, and you're pretty much reading it. This one is really, really effective for situations where you have to be very precise in how you say something. I think one of the examples, maybe it's in your text, maybe I read it somewhere else, I can't remember, but think about like legal responsibilities, terms of service, things that'll come back to haunt you in court. You need to say it the right way. You have to be clear. Everything has to be exact. Okay, that's where a manuscript mode is going to be most effective. Now, as there are upsides, there are downsides. So yes, it's going to be a very precise speech, right? But it's also going to be incredibly boring, most likely. Some speakers can memorize word for word and kind of deliver it with a performance aspect, like an actor. A dramatic reading, things like that. But for the most part, if you are reading off of a page, word for word, generally, there's no eye contact with the audience. It's very, very straightforward and boring. So if you want to get your audience excited, if you want to be conversational, this is not going to be the one, right? Sorry, there we go. The one that a lot of people lean on, especially brand new speakers, is a memorized speech. This is where you are basically pretty straightforward. You have maybe a written manuscript, but it's all in your head, right? So you're not staring at a piece of paper. You're not necessarily glued to note cards or anything like that. So this one can feel a little more natural. It allows you to maintain eye contact with your audience. You're able to move pretty freely throughout your space. You can use your hands because they're freed up. If you have visual aids, you can, use them without adjusting notes or anything like that. So memorized is a good one. Downsides we see with memorized delivery is the vocal stuff. Okay, people, when they memorize things and then they recite it back, recitation, they tend to get into a sing-songy pattern. Okay, so they're not paying as much attention to like the pitch and the volume and the pace It doesn't always sound natural. That's why actors are amazing, because they can give a memorized piece without with feeling a little more natural speaking patterns, right? Most people who are public speakers, they don't have that kind of training or experience or really know-how. So that part suffers, the vocal variety. Yes, Michelle says it loses the organic feel. Absolutely. And you know, one thing that when people memorize scripts, and I'm talking about not actors at this point, because actors do this, but if you're not trained to, you also, you lose gestures, you lose facial expressions, things like that. Some people try to include that in the memorization, right? So when I say this line, I'm going to step over here and put my hand in the air. Well, that still feels really stiff and purposeless, okay? The other problem we see with memorized speeches is that people go too fast. I think the text says machine gun style, which I totally love and I'm stealing forever. If you have a memorized speech, you know exactly where you're going and how to get there, and your adrenaline kicks in and you just start spitting out words as fast as you can. And that's definitely a downside. My biggest drawback with a memorized speech, maybe it's just because of the style of speaker I am, but it all comes down to your ability to roll with the punches. So if I have a memorized speech and maybe I lose my place, right? I don't know what to do. I have to start making stuff up. I have to try to remember where I was. What have I said? What if I forget where I'm going at all and I go totally blank? How am I going to get back on track, right? These types of what ifs are the biggest downsides of a memorized speech. And I believe that what if thinking is what leads to a lot of communication apprehension or stage fright. We'll get there a little bit later down the line. But that's kind of the ins and outs of the memorized delivery mode. Extemporaneous. I love this word. If you can just say it, extemporaneous, you already sound like a bajillion times smarter. It's got so many syllables. It's fancy. I love it. Okay. So and then I mess it up. That's classic. Extemporaneous speaking is, it's really execution, planning, rehearsing, right? But using minimal notes or an outline to kind of get you from point A to point B. So I try to speak extemporaneously as often as I can, because I want my lectures for you guys and any presentations I give to feel conversational. Rather than memorizing word for word a full speech, I'm going to write down, you know, the basics of the intro, the highlights of the main points that I need to hit. And then I keep an eye on them and I make sure I get there, right? If I accidentally go out of order and I, instead of going A, B, C, I go A and then for some reason lose my place, my brain skips to C, I can easily get back to B. I just need to remember to hit it. I've got to get myself there, okay? So it's a little bit more flexible than some of the other styles. Okay. The other thing I love about this style of delivery, especially in a classroom or a teaching environment, is if you notice your audience is not with you, you can stop. You can kind of roll with them. You can tell, instead of moving on to point C or whatever, I can say, I'm not sure if we totally grasped point B yet, so let's keep talking about it, right? It allows you to really assess and clarify before you move on. Michelle says, it brings up more of your added input. We gain learning your experience. Absolutely. And I think it would be very awkward for me to write out my personal examples specifically, Michelle. Like, there was one time when I delivered a speech, right? And I would hate to give you that story scripted, right? I want to tell you my story my way. That's what's going to make it impactful. And that's very possible in this style of delivery. And on that sort of topic of learning from my experience, when you speak extemporaneously, this is my favorite part, you give the impression, even though things are well planned out, right? You have some notes, you have main points, you know what you want to talk about, but it sort of gives the impression to your audience that you're talking about all of this stuff really insightfully, but just off the cuff. Like, I just have all of this brain power and all of this knowledge, and I have it for you just ready. Okay. So it makes me look even more knowledgeable and credible in the audience's eyes. Your audience is definitely going to pay better attention and be more engaged because you are engaging with them. Okay, because you're paying attention to them, you're rolling with them. Absolutely, Michelle says more personal, delivering it to them is more personal, absolutely. Now, it's not for everyone. There are some disadvantages, of course. This is a very difficult style for brand new speakers because it takes a lot of prep, both verbally and non-verbally, and you can't just kind of wing it. Okay, so when you try to speak extemporaneously for the first time, you'll have your notes. You'll say, I want to get from point A to point B to point C. And because you're not prepared, or maybe you didn't practice, or maybe you decided to just wing it, you might not know how to get from point A to B to C. You might not have clear transitions. It might make the presentation sound very jumbled and disorganized. So it takes practice. It takes a lot of failing, I'd say, to get it right. But once you get it right, I think this is what makes some of the best speakers that I've ever seen, is the ability to speak extemporaneously. And then there's impromptu speaking. Impromptu is nobody's favorite, okay? Impromptu is when you are basically called at that moment to give a speech with no prep, no nothing. This is a little bit anxiety inducing. Probably the most common impromptu speaking I see in the classroom is, why don't you tell us about yourself? And then you're like, oh, sure. So I'm Michelle. I have some children, and you don't know what to say. You don't know what's important to your audience. You haven't analyzed your audience. You don't know your main points, right? You're just going for it. And that can be a little nerve-wracking. There are situations where I think impromptu speaking can spark some very spontaneous conversations and good dialogues. So I will often in my classroom, even knowing everybody hates impromptu speaking, I have been known to call on someone. Let's say we're talking about, I don't know, the Joker. And I say, oh, hey, Michelle, do you think the Joker plans his attacks, or based on what we know, do you think he's a spontaneous villain? And that requires you to then think about it and come up with some sort of response, right? And by talking through some of these things, we get a good conversation, we get some good dialogue, some learning, right? And that can be great. However, sometimes, especially with students, because I've put you on the spot, sometimes students will just say whatever they think I want to hear, or they will say something they don't really think because it sounds intelligent, right? So it's not as genuine. I guess I hate being put on the spot, but I see the value of putting others on the spot. I think maybe that's more about audience management. If you are delivering a speech in an in an environment, and you call on someone in an impromptu way, if they feel safe and comfortable to respond openly and honestly because of the environment you set up, that can be really, really good. Okay. So there's a couple of things for you to think about with impromptu speaking. Again, this is one of those things that contributes to stage fright. If you ever, ever become the expert on anything, just be expected to be called on. Okay. That's your burden. You are now the expert on the thing. So people are going to ask you to talk about it. And that can mean a lot of different things. So for example, when I am, one of the things that I do besides communications and training and all that is I work with schools on accreditation and compliance with policies and things like that. And I know accreditation stuff back of my hand, right? So if I'm ever in a faculty meeting and the topic of accreditation comes up, I am ready because I know I'm going to get called on. They're going to say, well, why don't we ask Erin? Let's see what she thinks. And I just need to be ready for that. That can even be down to whatever your job is right now. Even if you work at, I don't know, Walmart, which is a fine job. Maybe you're really good at something at Walmart and people notice. So the next time you're at a company meeting and it's like, how can we improve this thing? Well, let's ask so-and-so. They're really good at it. Okay. So anticipate as an expert, you might be asked to talk about it. One little pro tip on impromptu speaking. When somebody calls on you to speak impromptu, whether or not you want to, whether or not you're sure of yourself, I want you to just pretend. This is going to sound weird, but when somebody says, Erin, what do you think about this accreditation rule? I go, oh, sure. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about it. If I go, oh gosh, guys, I don't know, like, I could maybe, right? That makes me look completely not confident, not credible, even though I know my stuff. It's easy to tell you to be confident or to fake being confident. It's really up to you to feel that. But as we talked about the week with our body language and Amy Cuddy and faking it till you make it, the more you fake it, the more you'll be it. Okay. So a couple of things for impromptu speaking. Also, one other thing, and I believe it's in your text, it's just a personal pet peeve of mine, so I want to mention it, is apologizing. When you are asked to speak impromptu, somebody says, hey, you know a lot about this, what do you think? Nobody expects me to have a speech ready, okay? They don't expect me to have a polished set of talking points. So if I sit there and I go, gosh, I'm sorry, I'm not ready to, right? That adds to that appearance of non-confidence. So don't apologize. Say your piece. Be confident in your delivery of it. Let them know that I'm willing to be wrong here, but here's my opinion, that kind of thing. So impromptu speaking. So remember, manuscript, memorized, extemporaneous, impromptu. All right, so when you are delivering, let's talk about our best practices. So first we're going to talk about the visual piece. When you are speaking, you are a visual element. Absolutely you are. I would love to tell you that looks don't matter, but they do. Sorry. So consider yourself as a visual element. How do you look? Are you dressed appropriately for the occasion and for the speech and for the image you're trying to play, right? If you want to appear as the expert, you dang well better look the part. All right. It's super easy to fake this piece in a virtual setting for sure, because I can wear my best blazer and button up and my sweats, and it's great. And when I'm on camera, you might not notice that my shirts are not ironed very, very well. They're a little rumply. In person, none of that's going to go down, right? It all needs to be kind of on key. Make sure you are speaking with confidence and authority. We talked about that before. If you act as though you are an expert and the things you say are worth hearing, then you will be, okay? Really, really, I can't emphasize that enough, okay? If you own the stage, you step on the stage, you take the mic with confidence and authority and an attitude of, this is my stage now, and you're here to listen to me. I have something worth saying. It does wonders. It's good stuff. Get set before you speak. This one is really more of a preparation thing, right? So if the room needs to be maybe rearranged, if you need to set anything up, that should all be done well before you start speaking. Seems like a given, right? But you'd be surprised. Sometimes people will take the stage, grab the mic. Hi, I'm Dr. Walton. Let me just move this podium over here. I'm going to grab a chair real quick. That should all be done ahead of time, or you need to learn to pivot and work with what you've been given, right? So if you, like me, I don't like standing behind the podium to speak. I like to wander a little bit. So if a podium is present, I'm going to kind of wander around it or in front of it. I might not spend time moving it before I start speaking. If I'm allowed to, I will take care of it before I even get on the stage, okay? Begin without looking at your notes. I think your text calls this positioning yourself physically, which I also love. A lot of people will grab the mic and they will just go right into it, okay? I find it very helpful and effective to grab the mic, take a big breath, and then go, okay? When you are in front of people, it's very easy to just jump right into it. Silence is uncomfortable. Everybody's looking at you. That can feel very, very awkward. You sort of need to lean into that awkwardness and give yourself some time so that you can prep yourself, be ready, make some eye contact with your audience, let them know you're here, you're ready, you're the expert, and then you get started, okay? And that goes along with the next point, begin without looking at your notes. I can't make any sort of meaningful connection or engage my audience if my eyes are not on them. That's all about eye contact. People that can maintain eye contact in a huge room of people, giving the impression that I'm looking at each of you individually, that is something that has to be learned, okay? When I first started speaking publicly, I was taught to pick a spot on the wall behind, just above my speaker's head, and deliver my speech to that spot. And it worked for a minute, okay? Then I realized that I was not taking my audience into consideration. I was not establishing any sort of relationship with my audience. So remember, you are talking to people. They want to be on your side, you know, they might be people you work with, they might be students of yours or bosses of yours. They want to hear what you have to say. So make sure you take the time and effort to sweep your eye contact, make a little bit with each of them. Don't stare at one person, that gets really uncomfortable. But that's something you have to practice doing. It's worth the practice, okay? Stand and move effectively. Standing is the best way to give a speech. When you give a speech sitting, it comes across as very weak, unfortunately. You want your feet squarely planted. You want kind of a natural posture. I tend to shift and stand on one hip. My body is facing the audience. We never turn our back on an audience, okay? That doesn't mean I'm standing still the entire time. When I move, I do it with purpose. I don't pace, right? Um, and a lot of new speakers, they tend to sway. It's kind of I think it's a parental instinct that you are self-soothing, if I'm being honest. And it's one of my most common pieces of feedback when I'm watching a speech is, I got seasick because you were swaying. So watch that. You have to practice moving effectively and with purpose. Why are you moving from point A to point B? Is it because you're trying to emphasize a point, and this is a great way to do it? Is it because you've been standing still too long and you need to add some visual interest? Good reasons, just know why you're moving. Don't pack up early. That one seems like a pretty straightforward piece of advice, right? If you finish your speech and then walk back to your chair and then leave the room, okay, well, wow, I don't know why, but it just completely diminishes the purpose of your speech, and it makes you look a little like, I got to get out of here. I don't want to answer any questions, right? So make sure you stay, you make yourself available. And then, of course, in the same vein as taking a pause before you start, do the same at the end. When you're all done, pause, and then exit the stage, okay? Okay. Let's talk about the verbal elements. So that was all the visual. I'm gonna go a little bit faster through these because I just saw our time. So your verbal elements, this is your vocal style, okay? So oral speaking style, when you communicate verbally, you use what we call an oral speaking style. Think about a written communication style. Do you write the exact same way as you speak? Would it sound like you? Probably not. When you speak, you use shorter sentences. You use personal pronouns like I, me, and my. You use active voice. Okay, so we decided, or I think, instead of it was determined, right? In oral speaking style, you use contractions, you use actual names, like I can say, hey, Michelle, what do you think, right? These are all very, very good conversational tips. You wouldn't write this way, perhaps, if this was an essay, okay? But when you are speaking, you should use all of these types of end styles. Make it more like a conversation, okay? When you're speaking verbally, you're bound to make a few mistakes, okay? Everybody fudges a line. I have a tiny bit of a stutter that I'm probably the only one who notices, but I do. Now, the thing is if I struggle to get my next sentence out, instead of letting my stutter win, or instead of saying, oh gosh, I'm so sorry, I'm stuttering, I just go on, okay? I just do my best to walk over the error, and generally my audience has no idea. I'm the only one who knows. So don't draw attention to anything that you messed up on, okay? And then be aware of vocabulary, enunciation, and pronunciation. Things like the words you use when you're presenting at work. You can use certain jargon, right? The words you use at work is called jargon. So you can use that if you're talking at work, but if you're talking at home or to friends, they might not understand your jargon, right? Same idea with slang. You use slang at home or with your friends, but I wouldn't use it in a work speech. So use the proper vocabulary for your setting. Make sure you enunciate, meaning you clip your words a little bit, and pronounce things correctly, not like when I said extemporaneous earlier. Now, vocal elements. Let's talk about your vocal elements, how you sound, okay? Your voice will give you away. If you are nervous, if you are unsure, if you are angry, your voice is going to lay it all out. I am Iron Man. This is it, okay? That's why I chose this graphic. So be aware that you're not going to get away with much. So when you're speaking, be enthusiastic, Be sincere. Okay. If you are not enthusiastic and sincere about your speech, your audience won't be. So you need to do it for them. They'll come along with you. Don't worry. Make sure you practice speaking loudly, not yelling. There's something called a stage voice. Learn to use it. Avoid disfluencies, which I just used. Disfluencies, of course, are those little word issues like saying like, you know. A few of them, no big deal. A lot of them, especially in a polished presentation, makes you sound a little uncertain of what you're talking about, maybe a little nervous, maybe a little disorganized. I am awful with disfluencies because I prefer an extemporaneous style of speech. That is a thing that I'm constantly working on, okay? So avoiding those fillers. It's not an easy thing. It's much easier said than done. And really the best way to figure out that you're using disfluencies is to listen to yourself speak back. So everybody hates the sound of their own voice on tape, but you won't know how you sound unless you just dive on in and listen to it. Michelle says, yeah, they go together. The extemporaneous and the disfluencies, absolutely. You have some pros and cons there, right? So yes, disfluencies. You'll want to vary your speech, your rate, your pitch, your volume. It's a lot like that sing-songy style we talked about earlier when you memorize. You get into a rhythm, all right? Take some time, say something slower, say a few things louder. Your main points, your thesis, you can emphasize those things, right? It makes sense that you might say them a little louder. Use your power of speech, the power of your voice, and vary what you're giving your audience. It keeps it a little more interesting. And then, of course, use your pauses effectively. Much like taking a pause to start and a pause before you leave, you can use pauses in the middle of your speech for emphasis, to give your audience time to think, to figure out how you're going to transition to the next sentence. But if you do it strategically, that your audience doesn't know you're doing that, right? Sometimes you need to take a pause to maybe think of an answer if you've been asked a question, okay? So you can use them to your advantage. It's absolutely possible. Now, when we are in a question and answer scenario, this is when we are having the audience interaction piece, okay? Huge advantage. You want Q&As with your speech. If I write out a report and I tell you what I've learned, I just kind of put that information in front of you and you're just like, oh, well, okay, here's some information. If I present it to you and then I leave the stage, you say, oh, well, that's interesting. I have some questions, but oh, they're gone. That's where the Q&A becomes awesome, okay? So you have the opportunity to answer questions, to clear up concerns, and ultimately make your point more powerful and your audience persuaded a little better, because you can shoot down all their objections right away. So there's a couple of types of Q&A sessions. There's the one that we do during the presentation, which, I don't know, not my favorite, not my flavor. I feel like it makes things a little bit disorganized and jumbled, okay? So how that might work is, if I'm making a point, let's talk about styles of delivery. I might do my styles of delivery and then open up the floor to questions, okay? It has its advantage, right? If Michelle had a question right then about I don't understand the difference between manuscript and memorization, that allows me to address it right away. If I am giving a sales pitch and someone has an objection, I can answer that right away before I move on. The problem is, sometimes I'm on point one of the speech and all of the questions really, really throw off my timeline. We can't get to things in a set manner. Yes, the answer may come up later in the presentation. Michelle put that in the chat, absolutely. So saying I will get to that if you give me just a second is delightful. So remember, answering questions can take a little time. You've got to build a little extra time into your session if that's how you want to do it. And as I mentioned with Michelle, you may get some premature questions. Always get to them later. Always promise you will and then follow through. Okay, so Michelle, that's a great question. I'm actually going to get to that on the next slide. If I haven't answered it then, raise your hand again and we'll come back. Okay. So the other type of Q&A is after the presentation. This is more of my style because I like to get all my thoughts out. And then I like to open the floor for any questions that have come up over the session or the lesson or the presentation. There's a little more control with this. I can control that I need to speak for 40 minutes and allow 10 minutes for Q&A, right? And I know I will get all my information out before we get to questions. However, if there are some attention span issues there, right? If Michelle has a question on slide 1 and she knows I'm not going to open up the floor until slide 30, she might forget her question. She might not know how to ask it in a way that's relevant anymore. Let's see, Michelle, most questions then are more thought out, burning questions. Oh, at the end. Is that what you mean? If you wait to the end, they're a little more thought out. I like it.
That's what I was saying, yeah.
Yeah, I like it because the premature question thing derails me really hard. So I like to give you all the information I'm here to give you, and then we'll talk about anything I missed, right? That's why I like that style best. But maybe it's to each their own. So a couple of tips and tricks to manage the Q&A sessions. Whether before or during, you start the ball. Okay, couple of good openers. So sometimes I get asked, or last time I gave this speech, there was an interesting question. Let's start with that. I'd like to address that. Okay, you can anticipate what might be asked and have some answers ready. Keep them in your back pocket. That will help you to clarify anything complicated or confusing. Make sure you know your definitions and all of that, because you may get, like in that example, I don't understand the difference between manuscript and memorized. Well, as the expert, I'd better know the difference, right? So make sure I know the difference so I can clarify for you. Always treat your questioners with respect. Pretty straightforward. It can be hard to ask a question, right? There's a little vulnerability there. So be respectful, even if you don't think the question's good, or if you have already answered that 3 times in your speech, answer it with respect. Keep your answers focused. Don't let your audience get you off track. And make sure you are addressing your answers to everyone. Even though Michelle might ask me a question, when I respond, I might make eye contact and say, that's a really great question, Michelle. But then I'm going to involve everyone in the audience in my answer so that everybody's aware it applies to them. Okay. And then, of course, follow the last question with a summary, pretty straightforward. After you finish the Q&A, it's always good to just do a quick recap. That's why I do the main point overview at the very end, just to cover what we just covered. Okay, let's talk about stage fright. Communication apprehension, that's the official term. I think the actual diagnosis is glossophobia, fear of public speaking. It has a lot to do with anxiety, right? Some people will say that CA is worse than death. They would rather be in the coffin than giving the eulogy. And that, to me, it kind of blows my mind, but I get it, because it's such a vulnerable state to be standing in front of someone, having so many people staring at you, expecting to be the expert, expecting to look the part and sound the part, and what are my hands doing, and am I swaying? There's a lot of things to be thought about when you're speaking publicly. Now, what I think is important to understand about CA is that it's all about your psychological response to being vulnerable or being evaluated by others. Okay. So when your body experiences a threat, it has a couple of responses. Fight and flight are the two most common. Okay. Your body can't distinguish between being attacked by a tiger and speaking publicly in an auditorium. You're weirdly enough, your body can't make that distinction. So your body, if you have communication apprehension, will look at that speaking situation as tragic and scary and fearful as being in the den with the lion who's roaring at you. As human beings, our physical responses are super not well adapted to that kind of threat. Our human race has survived with a little bit of fight and a little bit of flight. But because CA is in your mind, you need to understand the body's response to stress so you can figure out how to cope with it. You can overcome CA with enough practice and psychological understanding and what we call cognitive restructuring. So rethinking how you are thinking about this event. I love the idea that the audience can't see your fear, right? You feel it and you think it's all over the place. And to some extent, we'll know that you're nervous, but at the same time, nobody's died yet from giving a speech in my class. Okay, so it's all about reducing your anxiety through, changing how you think about it and being prepared. Okay, my speech teacher said, don't practice till you get it right, practice till you cannot get it wrong. And knowing that you're prepared is one of the best ways to reduce the anxiety surrounding speaking in public. So accept that, yeah, you're going to be a little nervous. Super normal, kind of the goal, actually. I'll tell you that the adrenaline of knowing, there's a little risk here, that can really punch up your speech. It can give it some excitement, right? So I don't want you to eliminate nervousness. I want you to control it, okay? You can help overcome your anxiety by taking more opportunities to speak. The first time you did anything, it was probably a little nerve-wracking. Same with public speaking. The more times you do it, the more confident and comfortable you'll be. Make sure you rehearse, know what you're talking about. Start strong and end strong. I'll tell you, the audience most often remembers your intro and your conclusion. So make sure those two are on the nose. Perfect. When you practice, do it on your feet. Practice standing. A lot of classes that I teach, especially online now, I get students that are delivering speeches sitting down in their beds, on chairs. Well, that's not how you would deliver it to an audience. You've got to get on your feet, okay? And also practice with people there, okay? Practice in a real setting. If you're going to be in a real setting, such as a classroom, go practice in the classroom. Know how much space you have on stage to use, right? And practice using it. Make sure you are focused on your topic and your audience. If you sit there and think about how nervous you are, it's just going to make you more nervous. So take that energy and really dial it into what you're about to talk about. I love this idea. Make your message more important than your fear. Remember, I'm here to teach you whatever topic, how to ride a bike. Oh my gosh, I'm super nervous about it. But if I can get it out, I can teach you to ride a bike, and then you'll know how to ride a bike, and maybe you'll teach your kids how to ride a bike, and you'll bond, and your family will be stronger, and that's so much more important. Okay, so instead of being nervous, I'm going to think about you teaching your kids to ride a bike and how important that is. Think rationally, okay? Thumbs up from Loki. You will not die from public speaking. Now I've said that and it's a concrete statement. I'm going to rephrase it. I don't know, in 10 years of teaching speaking and all that stuff, I don't know anyone who's died from speaking. Okay, you got to think rationally about it. There's a lot of things we tell ourselves and really get ourselves all worked up about. So let's talk about it. Does your presentation have to be perfect? It doesn't have to be perfect. We're human beings. It should be organized. It needs to be well delivered. But is it going to be perfect? No. You can be effective without being completely, on the nose. You can trip, fall, stutter, get your points out of order. You can still do a dang good job. Your speech is not going to appeal to everyone when you're especially persuading, okay? A lot of people want to walk in and say, I'm going to give my speech, and then everybody's going to be on my team. Everyone's going to vote Democrat. Everyone's going to buy the product. Well, the perfect speech is not going to persuade every single person in the room. Okay, even the best speakers I've ever seen, they don't always get it right 100% of the time. Some of my favorite speakers, I'll say, you're so good. Your delivery was amazing. I didn't buy that middle point though. That didn't really get to me, right? Totally unrealistic to think you're going to change the world in your 3-minute speech and it's going to be awesome. So accept that. Another myth, the worst will happen. I will die. It's not. You're not. It's okay. You can imagine these worst case scenarios, right? You walk up to the podium, you trip, you fall, you split your pants, everybody sees your underwear, they laugh, you run out of the room, and you can never come back on campus again. Oh my gosh, never happened, not once, okay? But if you focus on that particular image, gosh, if you've never heard of something called a self-fulfilling prophecy, that is when you think about something so much and you anticipate it happening and you assume it will happen and then you accidentally make it happen, okay? So instead of imagining yourself tripping on the way to the podium, falling, splitting your pants, showing your underwear, and running out of the room with everybody laughing, think about this. You walk up, you take the mic with confidence, you deliver it mostly pretty good, you stay on task, you hit your time, you say thank you, and everybody claps. Boom. How about that's your self-fulfilling prophecy, okay? Thinking the best of it is a better way to go about life. That's just general advice, right? Catastrophes, unlikely. You get to choose. And I've noticed that if you set yourself up realistically and you say, I'm going to go do a good job, I have my stuff together, I'm mostly super prepared, I'm a little nervous, I accept that I might make a few mistakes. And then you get off stage and then you reflect on what you've just done. You go, yeah, I did it. I did pretty good. I stayed mostly on track. I did make 1 or 2 mistakes. No big deal. I kind of anticipated that, right? It's way less awful than, oh, that one mistake and now everybody hates me, I'm gonna fail, right? It's awful. So the best will probably happen if you think it will. Okay. All right, we're gonna overview the main points. Michelle, if you have any questions, start getting them lined up. First things first, style of deliveries. Remember, manuscript, memorized, extemporaneous, impromptu. I want you to know pros and cons for each. Anytime you're using notes, basically, what should your notes be for each style of speech? If it's a manuscript, you're probably going to have a full page of words. If it's going to be extemporaneous, you're going to have brief keywords or an outline, right? You want them to be legible. You need them to be inconspicuous. Remember 3 components of delivery that you need to think about. Your visual components, so how you look, your verbal components, your oral speaking style, and your vocal delivery, which is how you sound. Rate, speed, pitch, okay? Understand the difference between a question and answer session in the middle of your presentation and at the end. What are the benefits and drawbacks to each? Understand communication apprehension, what it is. Okay, it's not just a little stage fright. It's like the worst stage fright. It's facing a lion stage fright. Understand that a moderate amount of anxiety can actually make your presentation a little bit better. And then think rationally about your presentation or your speech. It doesn't need to be perfect, except there will be some minor mistakes. It's just fine. You won't die. Okay. All right, Michelle, I'm ready. What kind of questions can I answer for you this week, if any?
Absolutely nothing. No, I thought that was it was thorough. No questions.
Excellent. Okay, folks. Well, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and get this posted for the rest of you. If anything comes up in the meantime, feel free to shoot me an email. I could talk about this stuff all day, my friends. So have a good week. I will see you next time, and happy speaking.